You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Arielle Schwartz. She's an author, founder of the Center for Resilience and Form Therapy. We're going to talk about somatic-oriented therapies, so moving your body to help provide therapy to yourself, I guess is how I understand it. And her book is Rewire Your Nervous System, again, somatic-oriented therapies. She's a distinguished clinical psychologist and author. She's been working in trauma care for over 20 years with patients and professionals themselves that help patients. So I think it'll be a great call. So welcome, Arielle.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here with you. And I actually liked the way you said resilient informed therapy, like emphasized the work that I do, which is touching.
Well, no problem. Well, how did you get into this field of work? I hope you traumatized yourself for that story a lot of times.
Yeah, there's some of that. I mean, I think that so many of us as therapists choose this field because it's part of our own healing, but it's not the whole story. I also chose this field because my mom is a psychologist, and I think she paved the way in so many beautiful ways for me to be able to do this work as well. She modeled quite beautifully the value of inner work and knowing oneself and how that can really lead to a really good life and really good relationships. And so I think I followed pretty strongly in her footsteps.
Okay. So were you just like a regular trauma therapist and then you were inspired to write books, or like what happened over the 20 years to cause you to evolve as a practitioner?
Yeah. So I don't know that I could see in myself yet that I was going to be an author, but I had a mentor about 10 years ago, or a little bit longer than that. I think we met in about 2013, and he was kind of helping to get my work more visible in the world, because at the time I had built my own website and nobody could find me because I had no SEO. And so, this is early on in website and also a time when people were really using blogs to become more visible. And so he encouraged me to start writing a blog. And he sent me home one day and he said, well, why don't you go put some words to the page and we'll put it up on a blog on your website in the next week. And I went home and I wrote, and I just couldn't stop writing, and something opened up in me. And I wrote like 5 pages of single-paced writing, and I came back the next meeting with him and I handed it to him and he goes, so you like to write? And I was like, I don't know. And he said, well, I give this assignment to everybody and most people struggle to get 5 sentences. You just wrote 5 blogs in one sitting. And I was like, okay. So he said, well, go home and do that again. And so week after week, I would go home and I would just sit down with an intention to write from my heart, write what was top of mind, what was important to me about trauma recovery, about working as a therapist, about being a mother, kind of different topics that were kind of sitting in my heart. And so within probably 6 months to a year, we had kind of hit a sweet spot with the blog where blogs were really getting traction and visibility. And I started to write about the nervous system. I had learned something called applied polyvagal theory from Dr. Stephen Porges, and I started to write really robustly about how much that work had changed me and changed the lives of my clients. And I hit
What is that polyvagal theory?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. I should probably explain that, right? Like, what is the applied polyvagal theory? Polyvagal theory is about how do you know your nervous system, and the vagus nerve being such a central player in your nervous system, and that we can kind of track that we have different nervous system states that are dominant, and sometimes they're efficiently helping us navigate the world, and sometimes we get stuck in kind of trauma-related nervous system states like fight, flight, and sympathetic nervous system that's keeping us anxious or panicky or on guard. And sometimes we get stuck in inefficient nervous systems that lead us to feel more fatigued and withdrawn and collapsed and exhausted or depressed or hopeless. And so the nervous system kind of explains a lot of our mental health symptoms. But because the vagus nerve is such a central player, and the vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve, it's a kind of mind-body superhighway of communication. And because the vagus nerve plays such a key role in our autonomic nervous nervous system health, it also becomes a key role in helping us find balance for a lot of mental health and physical health symptoms. So I started to write about how do we naturally stimulate the vagus nerve so that it can do a better job helping us find that sense of health and balance. And that blog actually went kind of my version of viral, where initially it was getting like 1,000 visits a week, and then it was getting 1,000 visits a day. And that was the point when my mentor turned to me and he said, you're going to write a book. And I was like, ha ha ha. And he looked at me, he's like, no, seriously, you're going to write multiple books. Like, this is a gift. And I was like, okay, I'll take that seriously. So now 8 books later, I would say he was correct.
Oh, 8 books later. So what have you been writing about? What are all your books about?
I would say at the heart of all of my books, they all center around trauma recovery. And the first one came out in 2016, so almost 10 years ago now. And that one was about, it's called the Complex PTSD Workbook. And it is about how do we navigate trauma that's not just a single incident trauma, but the experiences of traumas that are a result of ongoing, repeated life events that are kind of chronic and that we have very little control over. So very often these events occur in childhood, but they can occur at other phases of our lives as well.
My wife grew up like that years and years of abuse, so I understand.
Yeah. And it takes a toll on your sense of self and your sense of what's possible in the world. And, the most important thing for me whenever I do write about healing from trauma and nervous system health is to really empower people to know that healing is possible and that you're not broken and that there's hope for a path ahead.
Yeah, one thing I realized, I guess, a few years ago is you're walking around interacting with everyone else's trauma. You have no idea. You see someone, you talk to them, what kind of life they've had. But yet, again, you're interacting with it, whether you know it or not, in all kinds of situations.
Yeah. I think it's so important to recognize that, like, what most of us show on the surface is what we want the world to see. And then we carry deep inside of us what sometimes we're afraid to know in ourselves, or we're afraid that if we really show everybody else what we're carrying inside of us, that maybe they will think we're too much, or that, they can't handle who we are. So we get pretty good at kind of walking through the world, holding close to our, kind of inner being, that which isn't yet fully integrated into our overall sense of self. Maybe it carries shame or a sense of there's something wrong with me or I'm not lovable. But at our core, I think when we recognize that so many of us have faced challenges that, we're not alone with that. And it's what I love about, writing about these things and also leading groups for people to come together and recognize, first of all, we're not alone, but also we are so much more than the traumas that happen to us. We are extraordinary as human beings, and we have so much potential that we can tap into for our growth and well-being.
So what advances do you feel like you made in the area of trauma? What's your special insights that you've gotten?
Yeah. So I wrote that first book, some 10 years ago now. And, but I had trained prior to writing that book initially in somatic psychology. And I know you mentioned that in my bio. And somatic psychology is centralizing the body in the process of healing from trauma. And I trained in somatic psychology 30 years ago. So it was 1996. I did a master's degree program in somatics. And I can tell you that at that time, when I was training in the body-centered work, people would look at me kind of cross-eyed, like, what are you talking about? What is somatic psychology anyway? So I then went back to school and I got a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I did my doctoral research on the integration of mind-body therapies into clinical practice. And I was doing a survey of psychologists around the country here in the US and asking people what were their beliefs about the value of mind-body therapies into clinical practice. And pretty much across the board, people said, I think this is really valuable. I think it's important, but, and here's the big but I don't know that my supervisor would approve if I was working in a body-centered way, or I want to work in that way, but I don't know how to do it. I don't have the training or an understanding of that field. So after kind of studying the barriers to the integration of mind-body therapies into clinical practice, I made it my life's mission to close the gap, to increase the access to trainings, to increase a sense of understanding about the value of body-centered work and the science that supports body-centered work. So that really feels like one of my big contributions in this field is to have written books. Like, for example, one of the books that I wrote is called The EMDR and Somatic Psychology, and it's about interventions to enhance embodiment in trauma treatment. And that book is written for therapists who want to learn how to bring somatic therapies into other traditional forms of trauma treatment.
What's a somatic therapy? Like EMDR is what eye movement desensitization. I haven't done it, but I would guess sitting there with your eyes closed and you're looking up, left, right, and back. You're counting, recalling memories. So the somatic, I guess, your body is moving in some way as you're getting therapy. Is that what somatic therapy is? Again, you're moving, you're doing something with your body while you're being spoken to?
Partially so. So let's kind of break it down a little bit more. So when we think about body-centered psychotherapies, it has a few core premises to it. One would be the recognition that difficult life events leaves its mark on the body, or that the body bears the burden. Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And it basically, very, very much popularized this notion that our bodies are really carrying the impact of our adversities. And so talk therapy can only take us so far in the healing process. So once we recognize that our bodies are kind of carrying the remnants of the challenges of our past, then we can start to explore, well, how do we release that? How do we find a greater sense of freedom? And some of it is through movement, absolutely, like a sense of, if I feel frozen, let's say an event happened and I couldn't escape and I couldn't reach out for help, I couldn't use my voice. And now years later, when I think about that, or when something reminds me of it, I feel kind of frozen in my body. I get immobilized. I feel suddenly rendered a little bit helpless again, or a little bit powerless to navigate a circumstance of my life. So a body-centered approach might be able to explore the fact that now can be different from then, that event is over, but sometimes we need to help our bodies catch up to that recognition. Sometimes we think the way we talk about it is that the body is still living in trauma time, or it's still living as if the trauma is happening even though it's over. And so we help the body, and we help the body, mind, nervous system collectively recognize that a traumatic event is over, both by attuning to the cues in the present moment that let us know that we are safe now, we are not stuck in that traumatizing past, and also to be able to sometimes kind of complete what didn't get to complete back then. So if I didn't get to reach for connection, maybe I feel more empowered now to actually slowly, mindfully make contact, make eye contact, or kind of, lean my body towards something that feels safe and nourishing to me. If I didn't get to call for help, I can open up and use my voice. If I didn't get to say no and express a boundary, I can embody that boundary now. If I felt trapped in a situation where I couldn't get up and leave, I can feel the fact that I can move my body now, and I'm no longer stuck in situations of that powerlessness of the past. So some of it is kind of updating through the felt experience in the body that now is different from then. And some of it is very much working with the nervous system. So going back to the applied polyvagal theory, it's about recognizing that there are certain ways that we breathe, or certain ways that we carry postures that are basically representational of either being stuck in vigilance, our eyes are always tracking, am I safe out there? I'm breathing in a pattern into the upper chest. I have more muscular tension, so I'm stuck in more of my sympathetic nervous system. And if that's the case, I can focus on a long, slow exhalation. I can focus on grounding into my body. I can focus on really resting into gravity and letting my body come back to a felt experience of rest, so that I can start to come out of those habitual tendencies of vigilance.
Or I guess they call it hypervigilance.
Exactly. And conversely, sometimes we're stuck in more of the depressed state. We're stuck in more of a shutdown. And actually what we need is to empower our body to come back into a little bit more of that sympathetic mobilization, that I can move my body and I do have choices now that I didn't have back then.
So, how do you know when someone has a trauma? Is it a specific, I don't know, let's say like someone was always hit in the head. Would you have them like stand there and raise their arms above their head as if they were going to be hit, and then do motion that would be very specific to the position they were in when they suffered the trauma? Or is it not related like that?
Sometimes it can look very much like the kind of like a replaying of the event on that external frame, just like you're describing. Like I remember some years ago, I was working with an individual individual who had been repeatedly hit in the head. And anytime that memory would flash into his mind, kind of like a flashback, he would flinch, he would have a head turn, and he would lift up his arms as if to try and self-protect. And that was such a notable shape that his body was taking. And it was so automatic. So our work was really about slowing that down and feeling into that part of him that remembered what it was like, but really didn't get to protect himself because he was a little kid. And of course, the parent that was doing this to him was much bigger, and there was really nothing that was going to work back then. And so sometimes it is very, I don't know, literal, if you want to think of it that way, between the event and the shaping of the body and what would help someone complete that action. And sometimes it's much more internal, and it's much more of a felt sense of, like, maybe indeed, like you described before, like sometimes someone is closing their eyes and they're feeling on the inside a felt experience. And maybe it shows up as, I never got to be vulnerable. I never got to express my emotions with a sense of safety. And what comes up now is a tenderness and a self-compassion and an ability to finally express a feeling or let the sound come out while I cry, because I could never afford to do that as a kid.
So how much, this is like a missing component of CBT, of talk therapy, because you're not getting that with just talk. Here you're getting the body involved. Do you ever just have the person like do exercise just to literally get warmed up and then they're able to do this stuff more? Or is it not really about that? It's more of like somehow identifying what physical patterns they already have and then marrying that with the talk therapy while they're moving in that pattern or sitting in that pattern or whatever. And that's where the benefit comes from.
Yeah, it's a lovely question. I think that it can look a lot of different ways at different times. So I've been a therapeutic yoga for trauma recovery teacher for many, many years. And I have, again, like that's some of the subject of my books. I have a book called Therapeutic Yoga for Trauma Recovery. I have another one called Applied Polyvagal Theory in Yoga. And both of those are really looking at the role of just pure movement, right? So sometimes I'm teaching movement classes and I'm teaching yoga classes, and I'm helping people purely through movement release some of the impact of stored trauma in the body. And that in itself is really powerful. I think when it shows up in the psychotherapeutic relationship, the heart of a therapeutic relationship is the relationship, right? It is the relationship between the therapist and the client, and a foundation of safety that is cultivated between us. So at that point, as we're working together, if it feels like it serves the client to get up, to stand, to move the body, maybe even to, kind of shake something out through the arms, or to kind of press downward into the legs to really feel grounded. Sometimes we do use more, kind of large body movement. Standing up together with clients would be an example. But very often, again, I want to say that in the one-on-one therapeutic relationship, we're housing everything inside of the safety of the therapeutic relationship. So I want to say that like the majority of the work looks pretty subtle on the outside, but the body-centered component of it is that we're slowing it down so that the client can actually sense their body as they're telling the story and sense the emotions that are moving through them as they're telling the story. So we don't kind of throw the narrative or the talk therapy part of the work out with the bathwater, right? Like we actually really need some element of narrative and talk therapy work. It helps us to feel understood.
I don't know if I just thought about this, but what if near the end of your therapy, like you have a rig set up in your office that can safely help someone do a backflip? So they would be like, they would never in their life imagine they can do, and like the harness lets them do it, and they can do it safely and all that, but that's like the capstone of what they can do. They do a backflip like the first time in their life. Maybe that'll be like something amazing. I don't know.
It's so interesting. It actually brings to mind something that I did years and years ago, but sometimes we would do therapy out on a ropes course, and it's profound. Like it's profound when you combine therapy with something like climbing a mountain or doing a ropes course or doing something scary. Like imagine combining it with rock climbing, even on a climbing wall inside where you're safely held in a harness, as you say, but there's something so powerful about physically doing something that feels scary to you and allowing yourself to feel a accomplished to do it safely. And the biochemistry of that is kind of unmatched in some ways. It's a profound state. In fact, when I was writing the Applied Polyvagal Theory and Yoga book, one of the things that I was looking at is the role of exercise in neuroplasticity, and that we can kind of jumpstart neuroplastic change, or kind of like the laying down of positive states in the nervous system and positive neural networks in the brain. And that when we combine exercise with something like trauma recovery, we are amplifying the effects, because the exercise itself is releasing brain-derived neurotropic factor and GABA and positive neurochemicals that are actually going to strengthen the positive change that we're wanting to anchor. So a lot of that is what I focus on when I do teach the therapeutic yoga for trauma, because we'll do things like warrior poses or balancing poses or challenging postures that elevate the heart rate. And then we're combining it with mental fitness. What do you want to believe about yourself now? Can you feel that heart rate that's elevated in your chest? Can you let the breath rise to meet the shape? And can you sense your own aliveness and the fact that you are so much more powerful than you even realized?
Yeah, that's really cool. I did Tai Chi for, many years, and seems simple. It seems slow moving, but it's actually very hard after a while. But it's also a really good way to just like slowly warm yourself up and get yourself moving and all that. And you just, same thing with yoga. You just feel so much better afterwards. It's like, oh, it's weird,
It's so true. And then, of course, yoga and Tai Chi both also have the restorative side to it. When you also get to integrate the movement practice with a stillness practice and notice the subtleties of the interior of your mindscape and what you're feeling in the interior of your body, but you notice it in those very quiet spaces. And I think that the research really supports that when we practice slowing down and we practice going into meditation or a shavasana at the end of a yoga practice, or a yoga nidra, which is kind of a yogic sleep practice, and a body relaxation, that it improves our sleep at night. It reduces anxiety and reduces hypertension and improves cardiovascular health and endocrine system health, digestive system health. There are so many benefits.
If someone is unable to be able to do somatic therapy for whatever reason, is there anything they can do on their own? Like, going for a walk and thinking about the stuff that's happened to them, would that do anything? Or is there something that you can advise people to do, like to at least get them excited for somatic therapy, or to like start helping themselves a little bit if they're just unable to find a therapist or something?
Yeah, it's a good time to ask that question, because I think somatic therapies have really kind of blown up in pop psychology nowadays. And it's fun for me as someone who's been in the field for 30 years to see what's happening now. And you can go on TikTok. You can go on Instagram or YouTube, and you'll find someone out there that wants to lead you through somatic exercises for trauma recovery. So that has made some of the practices very accessible. I have a YouTube channel that's just under Dr. Arielle Schwartz, and there's some 200 videos that can lead you through applied polyvagal theory yoga or somatic practices. And so it's made it a lot more accessible, especially when finding a good personal therapist there's either a financial barrier or just like it's hard to find a good person. So there's a lot of ways to do these practices supported by the leadership of, experts that now have put their work up online. And then there's also, I love what you said about this example of like, would I benefit from kind of giving myself a very chosen time to think about something hard while I go on my yoga mat or take a walk outside or, go spin on my bicycle, whatever it is, right? And there could be benefit, but here's the tricky thing about doing kind of self-applied trauma work. When the trauma work itself is linked in some way to having been neglected or been alone or been left alone to deal with your emotions, when you're trying to deal with your emotions and you don't have any other social support, it can reinforce that sense of, I'm still alone now, nothing really changed. So I would say that if there was kind of a relational element to the wound, that we benefit most from healing in connection to another person.
Well, all right, so that being said, do you have somatic therapy classes where you have multiple people? Like, you're like, not everyone talk about your trauma, but we're going to go through these exercises and these movements, and we're going to breathe deep and et cetera, and it'll help you. You'll think about your own situation as you do it. You're with other people, so you're not alone, and you're still doing these somatic movements. Does that help? Or is there any partner somatic work? Like, acro yoga, where people are doing yoga on, with each other's body. Are there any other equivalent movements in somatic therapy where like you and another person are physically helping each other to move, let's say, or just the class?
Yeah, beautiful question. I think I want to start with the first part of your question, which is that, probably what I'm most passionate about right now, although I love individual psychotherapy and I just don't have a lot of time to provide that right now. Where my personal passion lies is in leading the group work. I think that group classes, they're more affordable. You can get a lot of support and you get the benefit of community and feeling less alone in the world. So, for example, I'm running a 6 to 7 month immersion course, and I've been teaching these courses online for many, many years, and I teach them on retreat and in person and on Zoom. They're effective in both arenas. And when I teach these classes that are for nervous system support in group environments, they're profound because people really open up. They share with each other. There's a sense of a cohort or community that we are healing with, and that we can, talk about the challenging experiences that we've had, but we also have those opportunities. I'll guide movements. We'll go through them together. We'll get up, we'll move, we'll experiment with what happens when we have these opportunities to attend to the parts of us that are carrying the wounds of the past, and to also really differentiate that now is a time for healing.
Well, very good. So what's the first step for people? Should they get, one of your books, or how do they dip their toe in and find out more about somatic therapy and decide to do it?
I would say that probably people are listening with a range of different backgrounds, right? So like if you've already been reading the books and maybe you've been in some of your own therapy and are looking to reduce your isolation, come take a class, right? Those are going to be amazing. And maybe a class feels like too much too fast because you just need to know yourself more. Maybe that one-on-one environment feels like just the right next step. So I would say to some degree, listen to your intuition. One of my favorite books that I have out there is the book that's called The Post-Traumatic Growth Guidebook. And much of my work is based on that singular book, which not only guides you through a journey of trauma recovery, but takes this resilience-informed approach and helps you build a sense of your strength, your resources, and ultimately helps you kind of set goals for what does growth look like in yourself, and how would that, basically launch you into living into your fullest potential, which is sometimes hard to imagine when we've been through trauma, especially for many, many years.
Good. Oh, last question. There's some people that meant that say, I don't like to be touched. I don't want to go into a whole crazy discussion about it, but in somatic therapy work for someone like that says that.
Absolutely. Personally, as a somatic therapist, I don't work with touch. Like I'm not applying touch to my clients. It's a very controversial topic within the context of psychotherapy. What I do teach is something called mindful self-applied touch, or basically inviting clients to place their hands over their own face, or basically kind of in the form like you would kind of imagine a self-hug, and being able to bring in that element of touch only if it feels right. Like there's plenty of different practices that don't involve placing your hands over your face or your arms. But when we're wanting to bring in that element of touch, I much prefer to teach someone how to bring that in for themselves than to be the one that's bringing that in part because therapy is an hour and someone goes out into the world and you bring yourself with you. That's going to be there wherever you go. And so that ability to know that there's a tool that helps you compassionately hold yourself no matter where you go in the world, that's golden.
Okay. Well, very good. Arielle, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And where can listeners go? Just a URL or, book name, or what are resources you have for them?
Yeah, you can find out a whole lot about me at drarielleschwartz.com. I also have a website that is resilience-informed-therapy.com. And on Facebook, it's Dr. Arielle Schwartz. On YouTube, it's Dr. Arielle Schwartz. And Instagram, it's Arielle Schwartz Boulder.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.